evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 71 of the Retrospectives podcast, Pathologic. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, it's only been a few months, but we returned to the survival horror genre once more, although this is a different brand of survival horror that we're used to.
Survival horror or walking simulator, Patrick? I'm not quite sure which one this is closer to, but it is definitely a big departure from the likes of Resident Evil 1, I will say.
Yeah, this is a game that I've kind of been tentatively interested in for a very long time. It's the kind of game people say, you know, it's the worst game I've ever played, but also one of the best. And we haven't really covered a Slav game properly, so I was very excited to try it out. And then as the hours went on, I became gradually less excited to play it. But that's something that I'm sure we'll get into discussing further. Had you heard about this game before we played it, James?
I basically viewed Pathologic as that weird Russian game. I had no idea what it was about at all, other than people I knew had played it and enjoyed it. I didn't even know the main conceit of the game going into it, so every single twist that I don't even think was supposed to be a twist on day one was a surprise for me. So, this was basically a completely blind playthrough for me.
It was mostly blind for me. I had read the famous Rock, Paper, Shotgun series of articles on it that were published way back in, 2008 or something. And I'd read the Pathologic 2 review. So I had a vague idea of what I was dealing with, but I certainly was not prepared for the reality of playing through it. At first you think it's just a pretty standard survival game, which we're pretty used to nowadays. Ever since Minecraft survival games with managing bars has become a regular thing that you expect, but this was something else. So for those who've never listened to us before, James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight we play through classic games of the past with the intention of reviewing and discussing them from a modern perspective. This is not a nostalgia podcast, and that's really the main thing I want to get across today. We're not here to review and discuss these games in the context in which they are produced. We simply want to know, are they worth your time to play today? And we want to relay to our experiences playing it as modern gamers. So Pathologic, it was released in 2005 for Windows, for PC, developed by Ice Pick Lodge, which is a Russian studio. A remaster of the game, Pathologic Classic HD, was released in 2015, and that featured new graphics, bug fixes, and was retranslated with new voice acting. The gameplay, however, was pretty much left identical, and this is the version we played. We didn't play Pathologic 2005, we played Classic HD, and once again, the most notable change is the translation and voice acting. And there are some people who argue that the original translation is actually better, although there's very few people who argue that the original voice acting is. That being said, it's mostly the same game. The basic premise of the story is that it's about a town that is succumbing to a fast-spreading and deadly disease. So you have three characters to pick from to experience that story in that town, one of which is locked until you complete one of the first two. So the first character is the out-of-town bachelor, who is a rationalist doctor pursuing a cure for death, and that's who James played for his playthrough. I played as the Haruspecs, who's a medicine man with surgeon training, who returns to his hometown after receiving a letter from his father, only to be accused of murdering that father. The final character is a changeling, a child who is viewed as a healer and demon or both, and hers is more of a meta playthrough and is definitely meant to be experienced after playing one of the first two. So James and I, when we played through this game, we Pathologic's like a long game. Each playthrough is 20 to 25 hours, depending on, how much you're forced to reload and how much you struggle. So we figured it would be best if we played a different character and then we're able to share our experiences of those different characters on the show. And then maybe we can put together a picture of what actually happened and why. It's a bit unusual, me playing the Haruspecs, but we figured it was better than both playing the same character and having a good chunk of the story locked off to us.
I'm curious about this because I'm sure that it is so much better to play the Bachelor on your first playthrough. I feel like because the setup is that the Bachelor is a newcomer to the town, so when you talk to people, everybody feels like they need to explain things to you, whereas your character, a native of the town, I feel like they just gloss over all of that stuff, right? Like you had to you were telling me you had to go and look up some stuff after your playthrough because it didn't quite click with you.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to make sense of some things, and that's definitely what happened. There are aspects of the town which are very unusual, and you're like, what the hell is even going on? How is this a real place? And no one explains that to you at all. You don't even ask the question about those things. That being said, the Haruspex does get a very hostile welcome when he first gets to town. There are people who are very opposed to him being there. Not everyone. It's kind of like a factional dispute. And you're often given the option to ask questions, and then the characters will say, stop making fun of me, it's obviously X. So it does give you a little bit of room to ask questions and try and figure things out. But overall, you are probably right. The Bachelor is, almost always going to be the best way to play the game first. But it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it's also that the Haruspex is just the harder way to play the game, I think, because the Bachelor starts the game with maxed out reputation, and reputation's very important in this game. Because I think your character starts out with like nothing, and in this 0, yeah. And if you're just walking around on the street, people will just start attacking you if you have 0 reputation. So, yeah, I think that you're definitely meant to start with the Bachelor's route first. I would absolutely recommend doing that. I would just wonder if Patrick had a worse experience because of doing that first, to be honest.
I'd categorize it as the Haruspex having like abrupt difficulty spikes. Like there are several moments throughout the game where you're like, why is this game as hard as it is? But I think that once you get your head around what you need to do to survive, that it probably kind of balances out a bit. But yeah, there's a couple of moments throughout the game where it really puts you through the ringer. And yeah, I agree with you, James. The game is designed to play the Bachelor first. I don't really know why it gives you the option to play them out of order. That's the basic setup. We'll get into more story discussion in a moment. I will say that when we do go into the story discussion, we're going to attempt to keep it mostly spoiler free. It's going to be impossible to avoid spoilers altogether, but we'll try to stay away from the major plot reveals. Although we will go over some more of the mundane plot details that arise just kind of naturally. So if you want a completely spoiler-free discussion, just skip the very final part of the cast where we'll go into a full spoiler discussion. Before we do that, just to give you a very brief idea of mechanically what you're doing in the game. It's a survival game. Your primary goal before anything else is just to stay alive. And you do that by managing survival bars, things like health, hunger, exhaustion, and your infection level. So you have to be getting these bars in control, eating food to keep your hunger down, sleeping to stave off exhaustion, and often filling up one bar or helping one bar is going to hurt the others. So number one goal, survive, and it's a survival game. The next thing, your primary goal, is to protect your adherents from succumbing to disease by completing the main quest of each day. Each and every day you'll have a main quest. James's and I's were completely different. We're on different storylines. And if you do not achieve the goals of your main quest, one of your adherents gets the plague, and you need to cure them with an incredibly rare item if you want to see the good ending to the game. So yeah, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to survive, and you're trying to achieve your main quest. And you're trying to survive while achieving your main quest, which is often easier said than done. So yeah, that's the basic setup. We'll dive deep into mechanics shortly, but I think the best place to start is the story and the narrative that takes place.
The main thing that strikes me about Pathologic's story is that many games try to write this narrative where the main character is the most important person in the entire world, and everything that happens in the game, in the world, revolves around the main character. Pathologic isn't like that at all in my experience. It feels like the writers wrote a town filled with, hundreds of years of history, and then, wrote all of these characters and then threw them, into the world and then just looked where the pieces lie. Your character isn't the main character, quotation marks, of the story. He is a character in a story, one of three playable characters in the story, all who have, a very different experience over the 12 days of Pathologic's story. And something that, we haven't really encountered a story too much like this on the show before, and I've honestly found it to be really cool how the story was more concerned with creating a believable world than, a really cool video game story for the main character to take part in.
The storytelling in this game is magnificent and quite unlike anything I've ever encountered. Like James said, you kind of just get dropped in the middle of it with no context or explanation for what's going on. And maybe that was particularly true because I was playing as the Haruspecs. But for the first half of my playthrough, I was very confused as to what was going on. And only as the story continued did I begin to realize the degree to which I was being manipulated, the political conflict between all the different leaders in the city, and how people were lying to me left, right, and center to achieve their goals. It's quite cool. The way the storytelling works is that in my story as the Haruspecs, I encountered the Bachelor, and he was going about trying to achieve his goals while I was going about trying to achieve mine. And for James, it was exactly the same thing. So a lot of the stuff that the Bachelor was interacting with and dealing with is something that I, as the Haruspecs, had basically no exposure to. And it was only after doing some reading after the show that I grew a better understanding of what was actually going on. Because the Bachelor's actions in my game seemed really bizarre, but now I think I'm starting to understand. So this very limited information you get is a really interesting way to tell a story. Something I love in my fiction novels, but something I haven't properly encountered in any game I've played to this degree.
Yeah, it's really cool. My absolute favorite part of the narrative is the fact that characters lie to you all the fucking time, and they manipulate you. The quest design in this game, I wouldn't say it's quite as freeform, like an open-ended as something like a Deus Ex game, for example. But quests in this game can go a bunch of different ways, like depending on how you do them. And you can manipulate the townsfolk just as much back. Like something like on day 2, I had this quest where this lady who was starting a shelter told me that she had been approached by all of the, the rich and, the rich people in the town. And she had asked them for donations to start this shelter for the sick people. And she told me that they agreed and that I was to go to each of the rich people and collect the donations and then bring it back to her. So what I did was I went to, each of these people, took their money, and then I just stopped progressing the quest. I just kept the money. And then the next day I woke up and I had a letter come to the house from this very upset NPC whose money I stole, right? Like, there's this, degree of reactivity and manipulation that takes place between, your character and the NPCs. And I really enjoyed that in this game.
Yeah, I think that degree of control you get is a really good point, because one of the problems I had with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines when we covered it was you were also a pawn being manipulated in that game, but it gave you very little agency to actually do your own thing. But in this game, multiple times, if you play your conversation tree options right, you can manipulate someone else. Like, I was in a spot where I had to find the... I mean, it's going to sound a bit silly, but I had to find the ending to a story. and because there was a girl and she really wanted to know the ending to a story, but if she didn't get to hear the ending that someone else was telling, she wouldn't do me a favor. So I went and spoke to the person who was telling the story, and instead of telling her that this person wanted it, I said, "Oh yeah, I was speaking to some people and they said the story was really funny, but I can't remember which part was funny." And then she, tells you the end of the story. But I bet that if I just told her, she probably would have told me to get stuffed, and I would have failed that quest.
Yeah.
So it empowers you to do a little bit of manipulation on your own.
The dialogue trees in this game are probably straight up just my favorite in any game. Something that I think we've lost over the years is really, really complex dialogue trees, and I think a big part of this is the rise of voice acting. You see it when we come into the later Fallout games, for example, like Fallout 4 in particular, because every line that your character has is voiced. There's a much more limited amount in this. In Pathologic, you can respond with entire paragraphs at times, right? And there's like really intricate conversations between a lot of the characters. Honestly, talking to the smarter characters in the game, I got lost a lot. Like, they are just talking about things that are above me a lot of the time. I felt like sometimes the dialogue became, I wouldn't say smart, but some of the dialogue gets very flowery in this game, and I found it hard to follow at times, particularly with Yulia, for example, who is... All of the characters in this game are kind of contradictions of themselves in some way. Like, they're very flawed characters, which is great. And Yulia, because the Bachelor is a very, scientifically minded character, and he winds up in this town that's extremely superstitious and has all of these weird cultural and religious beliefs, and he cares about none of that. So he talks to a bunch of people, and they tell him about this character, Yulia, who is apparently quite brainy. And you're like, oh, thank God, there's another voice of reason in this town amongst all these idiots. And then you start talking to her, and she starts talking about, all of this philosophical stuff. And then she starts talking about how much of a fatalist she is. And from that point, the Bachelor's dialogue is like, oh no, you were supposed to be, like, smart as well. What's going on? I really enjoyed the dialogue here. They don't hold themselves back, which I think is really important. They just go for it. They have, these huge sprawling dialogue trees with huge responses, and it's just really cool.
Yeah, my experience with the Haruspecs is quite interesting because whereas the Bachelor is a man of reason, the Haruspecs is very much a spiritual medicine man. He he's a Menku. He's one of the people who can cut up bodies and everything.
He can read the lines.
Yeah, he can read lines. He's given a lot of respect. And at first, because me as a person, like as a person outside the game, like I'm a rationalist, scientific approach, that's who I more identify with. I was kind of probably not the best person to immediately start out as a Haruspex because I was kind of like, what is this nonsense? But the more I played through this character's playthrough, and the more I actually began to understand what the things that people were talking about actually meant. Because when you first hear these philosophical stuff, you've got no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. However, I have to say, by the end of my playthrough, I was converted. In this world, these people and the things they're saying, it's kind of like a secret language. And by the end of the Haruspex' playthrough, you understand the secret language, and you understand all of these things that they said that were at first meaningless. So I commend the writing for getting me in the mind space of the Haruspex, which is a mind space that, I never usually occupy. And it's cheating a bit because instead of it actually being nonsense, it's real. But that doesn't change the fact that the way in which they speak felt very justified to me by the end of the story.
It reminded me of the first time I read A Clockwork Orange, to be honest. Like, the start of that book is just complete gibberish until you clue in to the way that the characters speak, and then eventually everything makes complete sense. You know, they just have this really weird, peculiar way of talking that's, you know, very metaphorical and very, you know, steeped in this 100-year-old culture or whatever. All of the characters in this game are like that, and they're all such a huge riddle at first.
Can I ask you something, James? Who were the characters you were interacting with? Because I had my main quest, but I would say outside of that, the majority of my interactions came with my adherents, who were all the children. Yeah, so that was how I interacted with a lot of the side quests and main quests. Were you? Did you talk to the children a lot, or did you have were you interacting with different characters?
Yeah, so each of the 3 playable characters has a list of NPCs that are very important to them, and they're the ones you have to keep alive for the whole 12 days of the plague. Patrick, your character, the Haruspecs, strongly believes in, like, leaving the legacy of the town to the children, I believe. So all your characters were the children.
It's about following in your father's footsteps, and your father had a responsibility to look after the children, so you've taken that responsibility upon yourself.
I gotta be honest, like, after I finished my playthrough, I went onto the wiki and I had a look at, you know, who each character's adherents were, or like who their bound were. And I saw that your characters were all kids, and I just cracked up laughing. It was like,
really?
Yeah, I was like, you hate children.
No, I mean, if you're a doctor, like the most just thing you can do in this town is protect the children. So I don't know, I found it very fitting. And also, I would say that these children did not act like children
at all. No,
at all. Yeah, they had a sense of innocence to them, but intelligence level wise, they were adults.
The Bachelor comments multiple times through the story that all the kids are strangely adult-like. They all talk like, I don't know, they all talk like university professors. It's kind of insane. But yeah, no. So the list of my bound was the Canes, were my 3 main ones.
Those are the people who are near the cathedral, right?
Yes. The town is split into 3 segments, each of which is ruled by a different family, and those segments are the segments that the bound are split into mostly, because you were in the middle with the Oglimskis, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if... Yeah, I guess the children are a bit more spread out than that. Like, you've got Grace near the cemetery.
Near the cemetery, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you're a good number of the children are in that middle section.
Yeah, so I had the Canes, who are one of the 3 ruling families of the town, and they're like in the upper class area of the town, but they're all intelligent but very, very superstitious at the same time. Like, they all believe in reincarnation and all sorts of weird stuff like that. And then my other 2 were the Stamerton twins, the guy who owns the pub, and then the artist.
Yep.
And then there was Eva Young, who I stayed with.
Yeah, she wasn't very interested in speaking to me as the Haruspecs. Yeah, so it's interesting because I got bits of dialogue from these people, like I spoke to the judge a little bit. Yeah, but really the narrative that I enjoyed was focused around a completely different set of characters. So the things I learned were obviously very different to the things you were learning.
Yeah, I feel like I spoke with most of the characters in the game. I didn't talk to Notkin at all, so I can't really talk about that. But I thought it was really interesting how the way the characters interact with you is just completely different based on who you're playing, right? Like, I played the first 3 days of the 3rd character's playthrough, and, you know, when I spoke to Andre Stamerton, who, to the Bachelor, was very friendly and affable the whole time, He just spoke down to the third character like they were dog shit immediately. It was really funny.
Oh, he's the one who wants to kill the Haruspecs. So absolutely, like
Does he?
it's
I didn't know that
yeah,
at all.
and once again, from a storytelling perspective, this is very interesting, right? Like it's you get an incomplete picture of these characters and their interactions, and it's only on subsequent playthroughs that you really start putting together the full picture.
Yeah.
So I love this. This is when people say Pathologic is an important game and one that should be experienced or talked about, I think that is most true for the narrative and its storytelling. It's just a wonderfully unique way to do storytelling.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I went back through the list of games we've played on the show while I was writing my notes for this episode, I have a hard time coming up with another game that rivals this kind of character writing.
Vampire. Vampire is the one that comes to mind. It's a different style, of course, but
Yeah.
I think that specifically the characterization is just as good.
Is about as good, yeah. I think this...
Yeah, the interwoven story is nowhere on its level, though.
Yeah, and something that I'm really partial to in stories is the narrative of just being a person thrust into a really weird town that has a really weird culture, and you having, like, everybody acting just so strange to begin with. I love that. Like, I really like that story premise. So going around and talking to every single character and trying to work out exactly what makes the town tick, that was so much fun for me. Like, I loved reading, like, every little bit of dialogue. Like, because the town has history. It's like, I feel like this is one of those stories where the writers wrote, like, twice as much as what's actually in the game, because everything, makes sense and fits into place within the narrative.
It's so funny you say that, because as the Haruspecs, that shit isn't explained to you. But I just kind of had to piece it together myself. And well, my understanding is that it seems like it was once a traditional steppe kind of village where they were probably roaming nomads worshipping bulls. But then industrialization happened. And as you can see in the city, there's like different districts where you have the butchers and, all these different factions responsible for different, jobs in the cattle slaughtering and export process. But they kept all of their shamanistic beliefs instead of them being swallowed up as they normally are with industrialization. So it was interesting that, I think that probably having the option to understand these things in detail would have been nice, but even without it, you still feel the richness of the history as you're playing the Haruspecs. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I just had less detail.
Yeah. Did you learn about stuff like the crops, like in summer when it heats up, the vapors from the twern plant start spreading through the town and everyone gets really lightheaded and even weirder than usual?
No, I didn't hear about that at all. But the Haruspecs is intimately involved in the twern harvesting process. So you as part of one of the things that the Haruspecs can do. Right? Well, the Haruspecs, one of the things he can do is he can harvest herbs, and then he can combine herbs together to create immunization potions, which he can then combine with another ingredient to make a panacea. And you can trade using blood with these people to get more herbs. So I guess I was exposed to a different aspect to it, just not as much as the background lore.
I didn't see a single part of that in my playthrough. And like stuff,
but I didn't know that detail.
Yeah, like the twern plant, it heats up, and like during the period that the game takes place in, even all the characters are suffering from being exposed to that constantly. So a lot of the weirdness is kind of exacerbated by everyone being high the whole game.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very peculiar. Patrick, how did you feel about the atmosphere of this game as we probably lead into our first music break?
Well, I think that the atmosphere of this game is incredible. At first, once again, this is a common thing with this game. I think that atmosphere and story wise, you can bounce off it a bit because it's kind of, 2005 era graphics. The facts that it's in HD don't change the fact that it kind of looks like a shitty take on the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, but instead of having weird alien, flora and fauna, it's mostly just an endless succession of buildings. But the more you play, the more you get sucked into its sense of time and place, because it doesn't feel quite like a real place. It's in Uncanny Valley. There are weird things that don't make sense, and the music is just incredibly ominous. So wonderful atmosphere that's only reinforced by the gameplay mechanics.
Yeah. Something that, before we go to that music break, that I think the game does really well, and something that I love in stories, is that they constantly walk this like little tightrope between everything being completely logical and there being potential supernatural elements in the game world. And throughout a lot of the playthrough, the Bachelor is very unsure of what's actually going on, because the characters, like every character in the town, is convinced that there's something supernatural going on to do with the plague, and all other sorts of conspiracy theories that all, it's not like there's one conspiracy theory, it's like there's 5 conspiracy theories, and each of the 5 conspiracy theories is referred to in a different way by every character. It's like they have 10 names for everything, so it's very hard to keep track of what people are talking about, even though, by the end it makes sense to you. And I think this is really... I think this plays into this atmosphere that Patrick's talking about really well, because the music is very unnerving, right? Like there's like weird vocal elements and weird electro, and then I'll play some for you in a moment, but it's bizarre.
I think that something that really throws you off is that there's no definite time period that this is set in.
Yeah.
The architecture in particular is all over the place. You've got things that look like prison blocks. You've got things that look like Gothic architecture. Then you've got like huge caves. And of course, there are some gravity-defying buildings sprinkled throughout.
These huge mega structures.
It makes you feel...
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you feel uneasy because it's almost real. Like you could almost believe it's a real place as you're walking through the city square with some fences around a park. But then you see this weird structure that doesn't seem to have any possible purpose sticking out of the ground, and you immediately feel disorientated. So yeah, it does a really good job making you feel uneasy and not at home.
I don't know if this is intentional, but this game has a really low draw distance, and that made me feel disorientated for the first 4 days or so until I got my bearings. So I agree with Patrick. I think the atmosphere in this game is actually fantastic. It's very bleak. This is a very grim game. Like the whole game is just miserable from start to finish, and it plays off that really well. I think the atmosphere is just brilliant, to be honest, from start to finish. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play one of the weirder tracks for you guys. This is one of my favorites. So in-game, each of the districts has its own theme, which gets modified, at night, and if there is an infection in the local area. So I'm going to play for you the infected version of the most main district, and you can kind of hear those weird vocals kicking in there. So here it is. So that was the infected version of Most Main. Patrick, I really like the music in this game. It's so strange, and it kind of plays into that surreal feeling that's, permeates the whole experience. I love weird experimental tracks like this, from the infected districts to the, weirdly grooving, beats of the black market and Ruben's shack. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's once again extremely well done and does a good job reinforcing that uneasy feeling with the different influences it's drawing on. The Haruspecs, I don't know if you got this at all, but there was also some shamanistic kind of chanting in certain areas that once again were more spiritual in nature, calling back to his roots. And I think the idea is that you were meant to be hearing your father's voice. Um, the weird blend of you'd have these more industrial techno beats that actually remind me of Vampire a little bit at times, and then it would be awkward, haunting choirs. It did a good job keeping you on edge. And although there were a couple of times where I was tempted to turn the music off, I never did. And this game took me 20 to 25 hours to play through. So I really enjoyed the music.
All right, so we'll come back to story because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about because this game is mostly story, in my opinion. But we have to talk about the gameplay. So if we had a scale from the most fun gameplay ever conceived to watching paint dry, I gotta say that I think that this game's a step up from watching paint dry, but not very much when you're not reading through the story. But you're going to play this 30 to maybe 60-hour game, depending on how many characters you play, and 80% of that is just holding forward, I think. There is a lot of walking from point A to B very slowly in this game. I would say that makes up the vast majority of your time in game. If it was not for the amazing atmosphere and story, I would have bounced off this game pretty hard, I think.
I completely agreed. This game is one of extreme tedium. Okay, I have a lot to say about the mechanics of this game because I feel like it's a bunch of ideas that are all failures in execution, effectively. Like lots of interesting ideas that by themselves you'd say they reinforce the atmosphere, by themselves add a lot to the experience, but in execution they actively detract from it. So, and I think that the concept of walking and the speed at which you walk around is definitely the place to start because that is what the majority of your time spent playing Pathologic is. So I think there is something to be said for being in this town and having to walk around without any fast travel or anything like that. You get to know the town and you get to understand the layout and you have preferred routes, and it helps add to the sense of place immensely. But you could cut down the walking by 80%, like literally 80%. You could cut down the amount of walking you do, and you would still have the same sense of place and experience. It's just too much, and demanding that the player spend that much time doing nothing of interest is unacceptable. I timed it. It takes you 5 real minutes to walk from one end of the town to the other, and that's if you do literally nothing else. It's awful. It's atrocious, and it really needs to be headlined as the core of the Pathologic experience.
So I kind of agree with you, and I agree with what I said before, but I don't want to, for me personally, I don't want to oversell how bad this was. It's not as if you're just walking. There are some little things to keep you, I'm not going to say entertained, but there
Occupied.
are things that occupy you from one end of town to another. And something that you'll do a lot is that you'll walk from one end of town to another, back to the other end of town, and then back, because most of what you're doing in this game is you talk to an NPC, go through all the really cool dialogue, and then they'll say, you should go talk to this NPC, and it's just a chain of that for the whole game mostly, with some little non-dialogue events, occasionally. Like, there is combat in this game, mostly at night, but there are things that happen while you're walking that make it ever so slightly more interesting than just walking from point A to point B. So, to start with, this is a survival game, and during the first, I'm going to say like 2 days of my playthrough, I worried about this a lot, and then near the end of the game, I found it trivially easy to stay alive to the point where like the survival part of the game wasn't interesting to me at all anymore. And you've got meters to manage. You've got exhaustion, hunger, resistance to infection, and the level of infection, and you've got to keep all of these, up. So hunger's one of the main ones. Getting food in this game is probably the hardest of the things to get, I'd say, just because something cool that happens narratively is that as the plague hits, the prices change in the shops, which I thought was really cool. And so it becomes a bit more difficult to get food. So, in the first couple of days, finding food is a bit more interesting. But then eventually you learn to understand the economy of the game and at first you kind of exploit the economy because, you don't really know how exploitable it is. And then near the end of the game, you find it very easy to exploit and nothing is difficult for you anymore. You just always have max all your meters for the last like 6 days of the game or something.
Hold up. Did you get infected, James, at any point?
On day like 3, yeah.
And you managed that infection to the end of your playthrough, or did you cure it?
I never cured it because I figured I'd just keep getting infected. I just kept like 5% infection for the whole playthrough.
Wow. Okay. I did not find it that easy.
Okay.
I used something to cure my infection at one point, and I had to roll back saves because my infection got to a level that was difficult to deal with.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah,
because I just was able to get lots of, because basically what I figured out on like day 3 is that this game has a economy that is, I think this is so cool narratively, but the game has an economy that's based on perceived value. And what that means is every time you see a trash can, you will loot the trash can and find maybe a bottle, maybe a flower, some string, a fish hook, something like that, right? And in this game, you can trade with basically anyone. And people trade with you based on perceived value. For example, if you see a little girl and you trade with her and she has revolver ammo, she will give you all of her bullets for a flower because she's a little girl and she likes flowers. Which,
Likewise, all the little boys like sharp things.
Sharp things.
They want
knives
and
hooks.
razor blades. Yeah.
Well, hooks are valuable because they're a religious symbol in this setting, more so than being sharp. Right. Because God pulls you up by your soul when you die. But yeah, so you get all this crap out of the garbage and then you sell it to townsfolk for stuff, and then you can you trade your hook for a bullet, and then you trade the bullet for bread. You work your way up, and I found out how to do that on like day 4 or 5 pretty effectively. And from then I had like, a full inventory of bottles, bandages, medicine, antibiotics, the works, and I didn't find the game challenging at all after that.
That is nuts. I mean, I would say that now I have a good understanding of the economy, but for most of the game, I felt like I was struggling to stay ahead. Like, I came up with a strategy that I think got me ahead, but the main reason I felt I needed to roll back to certain days to try again was because I wasn't spending my time efficiently enough in the early stages to get ahead.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you managed to get such a perfect mechanical grip on the economy so fast.
Yeah, well, so I approached the game very systematically because we're doing this review, I was concerned that maybe we'd run out of time. So what I did was, because every day you have a main quest, but you don't get that main quest when you wake up. You have to go find it, and it's not clear where that quest is or who you get it from, and there's like 3 to 4 quests per day. So what I would do is
you get a letter. Weren't you getting letters that told you who wanted to speak to you?
You do get letters, but you get those letters at set times. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I was waking up at like 2 a.m., which is like 6 hours before the first letter or something.
I was too, but I didn't think you could initiate those quests until you received the letter.
No, you can do the quest before you get the letter. I don't even know if you
Oh,
get
wow.
yeah. So basically, I worked out that you can sleep like well. There's this drug that you can take like before you go to sleep that makes exhaustion and health fill up while you sleep faster. So I only need to and you can get coffee beans from the bar, which fills up your exhaustion or lowers your exhaustion. So if you just spend like 3 hours a day sleeping, then like half the day doing the quest, and then the rest of the day just digging through trash,
You come out ahead.
I come
Hey,
out
so
ahead.
so James, let me put this to you. You've obviously you grasped the economy faster than I did. I think I've got it now, but it took me a while to get it. Was that fun for you? Like, what was it fun? Because after a while, you know what it was for me? It was grinding. It became grinding. I was enjoying when I was on the story stuff, when obviously take out the walking. But all of that other stuff to me was dull and yet more tedium I had to deal with to play this game.
Yeah, so the first 2 days or so, I thought the economy was the coolest thing ever because, like, I don't know, the fact that bullets would be worth 300 coins to somebody but worth like one to a child was really cool to me, and I really liked like learning what all the different NPCs valued, like how drunk people liked water more than anything, that kind of thing. I thought that was sweet. And then I realized how repetitive it was and how unchanging it was and how I'd have to do this for another like 20 hours because it never gets harder. Like day 2 and 3 is probably the peak of the difficulty survival wise, and then the more efficient you get at it. Because day 1 and 2, I wasn't very good at navigating the town because one of the challenges you have to do the quest in the time that you have. So there's this like time management element to the game initially. So I was, barely getting through the day, being able to do most of the quests, and then I, feel like I run out of time. And then near the end of the game, I could do all the quests in like a couple hours, and then have most of the day for rummaging through trash. And it was at that point where I was getting very bored with the gameplay. The game does try to like ramp the difficulty of the game up. Like in the first 2 days, there's no plague districts, so you can walk around the town easily. Then plague districts are introduced, and walking through plague districts is anxiety inducing because there are these clouds that appear, and if you touch them, you get infected. And there's rats that try to bite you and infect you. There's muggers who try to knife you, and you die in one hit in this game. If a mugger appears behind like a house and throws a knife at you, you die in one hit, and you have to reload. And then arsonists appear. It gets like like the streets get increasingly hectic as the game goes on, but it wasn't enough. Like I needed it to be more hectic for me to be for the game to maintain my engagement from start to finish. And it did not do that.
The walking from place to place doesn't really matter. Like the obstacles in your path, you quickly learn to deal with them. Plague clouds that you have to dodge always come from in front of you. So all you have to do is when you see one, just turn around and move to the right, and you'll dodge it. The people with the knives will always throw the knives. So as long as you're moving parallel to them and not at them, the knife will miss, and they run slower than you, so they'll just chase you forever. Same with the rats, they'll just chase you forever, and as soon as you enter a building, they all disappear. So once again, dealing with these things quickly becomes tedious and boring. Now, I think the number one issue, I've said all these things are tedious, but the number one issue is that for me, it felt like I was being forced to engage with these mechanics every waking moment I had. So we've touched on it a little bit with the amount of time you sleep. The game is structured into 12 days, and at the beginning of each day, you can start your main quest. Once you've done the quest, you can't do anything more on that quest until the next day hits. Now, what you might expect with this game is you would reach, say, 8 p.m., you would go to bed, and then you'd wake up in the morning at, 7 a.m., ready for the next day. However, that's not how sleeping in this game works. You're on a continuous clock. You're on a however many hours it is, 168 hours. That is your game time. So when you're awake, your hunger bar is increasing. When you're asleep, your hunger bar is increasing. And when your exhaustion bar is at 0, you have no more need to sleep. That means that if you finish sleeping and your exhaustion bar is depleted at 1 a.m., you better get out there and do something. And what is there to do at 1 a.m.? Why, you can kill bandits. So my experience, a large part of my experience when I was not walking place to place doing quests, was engaging with these tedious mechanics, and I felt I had to, because if I wasn't efficient in those hours, earning money and earning resources, then I'd be punished the next day because I wouldn't have enough money or resources to do the things I needed to do. So if I had to pick the number one flaw that kind of ruins everything, it's this fucking 24-hour clock, because in combination with all the mechanics, you are forced to grind and you have no choice in the matter.
You sound like you hate this a lot more than I do. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's poor, but I don't hate it. Like, I think the number one thing for me was that a big part of the story is this sense of suspense and intrigue. And I know it's kind of like padding, but for me, it was really engaging to have this huge, confusing dialogue with a character and then spend, like 5 minutes walking and thinking about that conversation I just had and wondering, what's going to happen next. So I think it gives the story time to breathe in some ways. I think the atmosphere is so good that it pushes it up a bit as well, but you kind of can't get around the fact that it is bad. But I gotta say, I didn't loathe it as much as you seem to have.
You know what I was thinking as I was playing this game, James? And, I'm kind of convinced that this is what the game should have been. It should have been a turn-based game, or like almost board game-like in its approach, where you would be in a place and then you would click on the place you want to go. You would suffer damage or disease based on dice rolls, and you'd be able to make all the same decisions. You'd be able to do all the same looting, whether it's action points or whatever. I haven't got a board game, thing up in front of me, but it would have just gotten rid of the tedium of experiencing all that in-between stuff. And you could still have the music, still have the haunting atmosphere, but you get rid of the 90% of this game which sucks balls and is awful to experience and is not fun. And it's not fun because it's not fun because it's challenging. It's not fun because things are horrible. It's not fun because it's boring.
I don't think this game's very hard.
You don't think the game's hard? I think that's going to... I found the game difficult.
I wonder if you would have disliked my route even more, just because I feel, because I'm on max reputation the whole game, I didn't have to worry about that. Like, it was just always high.
You reach max reputation in day one with Haruspex. It's not hard. Like, it's really, that's not the difficult part. The difficult part is just, I think, managing and understanding the systems, which I think you grasped faster. My problem is that when we played Resident Evil, I really enjoyed the opportunity cost and decision making you were making in that game. And that game was difficult and it was hard, but it was hard in a way that was putting pressure on you in interesting ways.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like it's putting pressure on me in interesting ways. And that's my point of contention, because I see a lot of people who are like, well, the game's trying to create this awful repressive atmosphere where it feels like you can't win and things are horrible, and that's fine. Like, it's fine that there's these hunger bars and everything and that you're desperate for food, and at one point I traded a gun for food. That's all great. but when the game is boring, the game has failed. Like, I shouldn't feel bored playing Pathologic. I should feel immersed, and I should feel in pain, and I should be put into having to make difficult choices. I shouldn't be, just bored out of my mind thinking about other things. And that's what happened to me playing Pathologic. So to me, it's a complete mechanical failure. It's a complete shit show. And I don't think there's any way of getting around that.
What I really wanted was for there to be like, so usually in the day there's like 4 quests, and you need to do that in time, or you need to do one of the quests in time, and then maybe the others depending on the day. What I would have liked from this game was that for each day to have had like 10 quests and only time to finish like 6 of them. To
That's
me,
great.
that would have
Yeah.
been that would be fun, because then even if you keep everything else the same, then you're at least constantly thinking about like weighing up your decisions. If I'm walking from point A to B while making these, valuation, judgment calls over which character to help, where to spend my time, then I'm still engaged, even though technically I'm still just holding W for like 5 minutes, because I'm thinking and planning.
I love that suggestion, James. I think you're exactly on the money of what this quest design should have been. Give us difficult choices where we can't save everyone, have those people we don't save die, and then we got to live with the consequences. Make the gameplay quest design about things fucking up and things being horrible, but give us some agency and control over it and make it interesting to experience. Pathologic fails to do that. I can't get that across more. You're focused on these mechanical niceties where you should be focused on trying to save people and not being able to save everyone.
Yeah, and it really, because I tried to play another character, the changeling, the unlockable one, after I finished the first character. Having to go back to the first few days where everything's even like, I was fine. I found the end of the game easy, like on the bachelor's route, and then it went back to, there was no muggers, no arsonists, no nothing to get in my way. It was just back to literally holding W for 5 minutes with nothing in between. It was like, I don't want to do this.
Can I ask you on that playthrough? Because one of the things I realized as I played through, like I played through day one and then restarted. I played through day 1 and 2 and then restarted. Played through I restarted. I was making a save at the beginning of every day, and there were a few times when I reverted. And the reason I did that was I felt I wasn't efficient enough in the earlier days.
Yeah.
Like I just wasn't getting enough done. So did you find for your new playthrough that you were being hyper efficient and getting way ahead of the game?
Yeah. Yeah, like I was finishing all the quests at like 10 a.m. or so. Not 10 a.m., but like midday.
And then you
least.
just looted bins for 10 hours
well,
straight. Yeah.
At that point I was sick of the walking, and I was like, what I'll do is I'll try to sleep as much as possible, because then I'll have to, because Clara's thing is that she has lots of lockpicks, because in her inventory, lockpicks stack, so you can, instead of taking a slot each, so you just rob houses for stuff all the time. Nice. So I was like, okay, I'll make it harder for myself by sleeping, and then not looting bins constantly, and then I'll just have to steal everything, and people try to attack me in their house. I don't know.
Can we talk about the combat a bit? Because I think the combat is the perfect example of how something that can be difficult at first and seem hard to get to grips with, but once you understand it, it's just boring and you do the same thing every time.
Yep.
The combat, I used melee combat for the majority of my playthrough because it doesn't cost any bullets, and you basically have an infinite supply of knives when you attack muggers.
Knives?
Because they've got a chance.
Yeah. I had a scalpel.
Oh, right. Well,
a scalpel is made for cutting flesh, Patrick.
Yeah, so are knives, mate. Well, maybe it depends on the knife, but yeah, the hand-to-hand combat is atrocious. Like the animations and the damage zones and how long damage persists after you strike and after they strike you, complete nonsense. You basically have to learn it by rote, and then once you've learned it, you can just infinitely back up from enemies, kind of pressing forwards and backwards bit by bit, and stab enemies to death 100% safely.
Gotta hate
once
rats.
You understand, once you understand how to do it, it is 100% safely kill any enemy in the game in melee combat. And basically, the more people you kill, the more money you get. It's the mugger economy where you just kill an infinite number of muggers and get infinite money as much as you have time. It's awful. Like that being a thing that you have to do, and you have to do this, and you should do it if you want more money, which you do because you want to keep all your bars filled. You should do this every single day for literal hours and hours of game time. I probably spent 2 to 3 hours killing muggers the exact same way. It's everything I hate about JRPG grinding, but worse. It's awful.
I didn't kill nearly as many people as you did, because I basically only used melee to kill rats and then just used bullets for muggers, because, like, a bullet costs, like 300 coins or something, and a mugger kit gives you, like, 4 to 600. So it was, like, and you get an item, probably, so it was, like, per bullet, it was pretty efficient to kill them that way, even though you had to go and get the bullets.
You seem to have mastered the economy far faster than I did, because I was struggling with this stuff to probably about day 10 or 11.
Okay.
And I would say that yeah, it kind of wasted me a lot of time in the later stages of the game even.
The main thing I noticed was that after a couple of hours, the bins, like, reset their contents. And just next to the theater, like, if you do a loop around the theater, there's, like, 10 bins, and then in that little park next to the theater, there's, like, another 10 bins. I looted those 20 bins so many times in my playthrough. I got so much stuff to sell.
Yeah, I thought they were once a day, so
No, it was
make
like
sense.
every hour or something, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I looted, like, every single bin, even if I just walked past it. I checked it again, and yeah,
that's no good.
That's what I did instead of kill muggers, basically. Because you get medicine, and I had so much medicine from children, so I basically looted all the bins constantly. Checked the trade inventory of, like, literally every NPC I walked past.
I did the same thing. Yeah.
It's not right to say that you're just walking from point A to B. You're walking from point A to B, looting every bin, talking to every NPC. The NPCs actually change their dialogue every day, which I didn't notice until, like, halfway through the game, which I thought was a nice touch. Not the main NPCs, obviously they change, but, like, the generic, because generic NPCs in this game all look exactly the same. Every drunk character has the exact same character model. Every child, there's, like, 2 little girl models, maybe 3, and there's, like, a teenage boy. He looks exactly the same. All the muggers look exactly the same. And I had a situation where I was in a warehouse and there were 7 of these copy-pasted models running at me.
Did you find that to be an issue? Because that didn't really bother me at all.
Honestly, I think it makes the game better, because it means you can quickly tell what they have in their inventory. Cause,
that is true,
yeah. Like, all of the, like, that the drunks have bandages, and that the little girls have bullets, and that the teenage boys have medicine. So that made it easy to shortcut having to talk to everyone, which I still did anyway. But yeah, the gameplay in this game is extremely repetitive outside of talking to characters. I don't necessarily agree with Patrick, because I had the same thought that you could change it to a like a turn-based sort of menu-driven system. Honestly, it would just be like Persona then. Like, that's Persona's non-dungeon gameplay. Is time management and talking to people. But I feel like you lose something in the atmosphere.
More complex version of that, like, have a map and you can, go to any number of locations. You have all the conversations with everyone. You're still managing all your meters. You can even say, along the way, loot all the bins, whatever you want to do. It would be a rather complicated system, but basically what I'm getting at is a lot of the real-time mechanical stuff that you engage with is boring. So why does it need to be there? Like, what does it really add to the experience? Why don't we take that out, make it a game that's, 6 hours long, and suddenly you have a game that's just got the good bits? Like, and that's what I'm getting at. I don't think it would be. I think it would be a significantly better game, and I think you're gaining so much more than you're losing there.
I agree. I think you're losing something. I'm not necessarily sure I care about losing that something. But I think
Being in a 3D space, sure, there is a degree of immersion you're losing.
there's a big degree of immersion. Honestly, like I found navigating the plague districts, until I realized how easy dodging the clouds was, to be relatively engaging at first. Um, yeah, I got to agree. It's kind of it really really wears you down, and not in a good way. Like I know Pathologic's supposed to be this dreary, bleak and depressing game, but the gameplay
It's dull.
is dull. Yeah, it's just boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not oppressing in the way I want it to be.
Mm.
Okay, should we have another music break, James?
Yes. I asked Patrick what song he was going to pick, and he said, "Oh shit, I didn't choose a song. I'll just choose the main menu music."
I think the main menu music is a great pick. Honestly,
Well, I
it's
mean,
a fantastic song.
It's a throw. It's like the easiest pick in the world, but I agree it is a great song. So this is the main menu music. That was the main menu music of Pathologic. Patrick, I gotta ask you, do you think the gameplay of this game is worse than Luna Silver Star Story?
Yes, I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say this. The gameplay in this game is just truly awful. The storyline of Pathologic is leaps and bounds. Like Pathologic's storyline is up in the clouds, whereas Luna's is stuck in the mud. But when it comes to gameplay, this is one of the worst games I've ever played. Were you expecting me to say that?
Oh yeah, I was expecting you to say that.
Yes.
I think Luna's gameplay is better than this. And I think some of the gameplay in this game is more enjoyable than it has any right to be, because of narrative reasons. Like, I honestly, like, the first couple times I got such a kick out of trading flowers for bullets with this child. It was really funny. Obviously, diminishing returns, but yeah. Do we want to go into spoiler discussion now? Because I just want to talk about the story more, honestly.
So yeah, we're moving into full spoilers now. So if you absolutely must play this game, which you shouldn't, now is your final chance to play it mostly blind without major spoilers.
Patrick is wrong, by the way. You should play this game, but
So James, what I wanted to do was share some details of what my individual playthrough was like. So do a bit of a day-by-day breakdown of the things that I was experiencing, and then maybe you can do it you can share your own experiences, and together we can paint a picture of the storyline and what playing this game is actually like from a story perspective. So a brief overview is that you arrive in town. You've been accused of murdering your father, and you must clear your name. So your reputation is at 0. Everyone attacks you on sight. So you do a few good deeds on your first day. It might take you a little while to figure out how to do that, but you can get your reputation up to a point where you're not getting attacked by anyone pretty quickly. It's not too hard. So you've got your reputation back, and your main goals are at first are to claim your inheritance and try to solve this murder and clear yourself of any suspicion related to this murder. So you continue to work on that, and in a couple of days in, you meet the Bachelor. And the Bachelor, at first, you're very scared of him because you've been told by multiple people that he's out to kill you, he's out to get you in trouble. But because he quickly diagnoses the deaths of these people as infections, he clears you of suspicion, and you start working with him to try to cure the disease. So he uses his more scientific methods, and you use your more natural remedy sort of methods, and you're both working cooperatively to try and find a vaccine or a cure for the disease. I guess the main difference between the two is that the doctor wants to form a vaccine to immunize people to prevent others from getting the vaccine, whereas the Haruspex is more ambitious. He wants to create a panacea, a cure. He wants to get a potion that he can give people with the disease to cure them of it. And that's very much a difference in their approach. So things were going pretty well. We were making progress on trying to figure out this disease. And then day 5 hits. And on day 5, you get captured. All your things get stolen. You get thrown in a jail cell. Your reputation goes to basically 0. And then you need to kill 2 more guards to escape your cell, which takes your reputation to 0. And you'll almost definitely get infected because you're trapped in a jail cell and there are infection clouds blowing in. So that was an insane difficulty spike that was really tough. So it kind of completely ruined my bandit knife economy that I'd built up over time. You get something you get a revolver and some medicine, a few bullets, but it was a real kick in the teeth. One that I'm ultimately in favor of because it really, puts the screws into you. But yeah, it was tough to recover from that. So I got infected and I did not handle it well. I eventually made my first panacea and I used that to cure myself. You're probably meant to save it for later, but I was really struggling with the infection. I didn't have the same grip on the economy you did, so I just immediately used it. So overall, the first playthrough is very much about survival. You don't get a lot of details on the inner workings of what are going on. You kind of move from person to person. They speak a bunch of mumbo jumbo at you as you try to claim your inheritance, but you don't really know what's going on. And then the more substantial thing you're doing on that you can understand is your work with the doctor to try and cure this disease as the town gets worse and worse. So James, tell me about the first half of your playthrough. Was it... I know it's different from mine, but tell me how it was different.
Okay, so the doctor arrives in the town because the powers of B are threatening to shut down his institution, which he has founded in the hopes of curing death. The Bachelor's primary goal is that he is coming to the town because he has heard of this elusive figure, Simon Kane, who is allegedly 150 years old, and you want to study someone who's immortal so that you can cure death. So you get to the town, and then you find out that Simon's been murdered. So you go to the Kane's residence and you speak with Georgie, his brother, who is, grieving for his lost brother, and he tasks you to find, and the body is missing as well, and he's like, or you can't access the body because it didn't focus, whatever that means, you don't know it at the time. And because, your institution's going to be destroyed if you don't find Simon's body, you agree to help Georgie track down the killer. So the first day, and I'd like to remind the audience that when I came into this game, I had no idea about what it was about at all. This was blind for me. So the first day was a real murder mystery for me, and I went around the town, trying to figure out who killed Simon until it becomes apparent that it was a disease, who had killed both Simon and Patrick's character's father. So after that, the doctor, his primary goal is, figuring out how to stop the onset of this. And at the start, it's very political for me. Like the town's ruling structure is a triumvirate. There's three distinct families who each have their big share of the pie. And one of the things you do early is you need to consolidate power with one of the three families so that they can, effectively give orders to the whole town in order to, create order in what's obviously going to be a very chaotic environment. So you do a lot of political intrigue stuff talking to the big families until eventually Saburov is given the power of governor. And all this time you're also like trying to, investigate what kind of disease it is. You try to get cells from a dead person in order to investigate under a microscope, which you actually do. Like you get a cell item and you put it in a microscope and you look at it and you look at all of them and he comments on it, because in this game your characters are very well defined. So I find in a lot of games, like the protagonist, when you play in a first-person game, usually doesn't have that much personality or intellect or skill of their own. Not in this game. In this game, my character, the Bachelor, is a doctor. He knows doctor things. All his responses are very clever doctor things that I would have no idea about. But, I'm playing my role, so I click on them and I say them. And then day 4 or 5, I think this is before you get locked down, is one of the coolest, convergences of quest chains that I've probably ever experienced in a game. And this is the day, Patrick, you might remember that I decide that I need a beating human heart in order to create the vaccine.
So this part of the story from the Harrispex' perspective is actually pretty shocking, because things are going pretty cordially between you and the doctor, and then all of a sudden he asks you to cut out the heart from a living human being. But I guess that's what they both decided needed to be done if they were going to fight off the greater threat that faced them both.
Because we've discovered that this plague is one that kills people very quickly and violently, but it burns itself out. Like, once the host is dead, the virus dies too. So in order to study it, we need a live sample of the virus, or the, whatever the bacteria, whatever it is. But because, the deceased, it leaves their body, it has nothing to feed off of, we need a living specimen. Specifically living tissue. And in this town, you discover culturally that it is against their culture to cut flesh at all. There are only a few people who are allowed to do it without persecution, your character being one of them, Patrick.
Yeah, your character is referred to as a Menku by the other characters throughout the game. It's not his surgeon training that gives him the qualifications to cut people up for autopsies. It's entirely his role as a Harrispex. It's his spiritual role that he has occupied and the one he's inherited from his father.
Yeah, he can read the lines, as it were, which is kind of like metaphorically both, knowing how to dissect a person, but it also has these spiritual connotations as well. Anyway, so the characters in this game, and I'm going to get to my cool story now, are very flawed characters, and some are very morally dubious. Some made me actively uncomfortable interacting with them, and this is the story about one of these times. So, on this day, the previous day, me and Ruben, because I've been working very closely with Ruben, who was your father's protege, so he is, not a full doctor, but he's, on his way there, so he's pretty good with medicine, but he's not, accomplished. So, that today you need to get some kind of living tissue. So, I find you, and I say, hey, look, I need this. And your character goes, yeah, okay, I'll do it. What I'll do is I'll meet you at this district at 10 p.m., and then whoever's there, I'm going to jump them, kill them, and take their heart, and you're going to take it. And my character's like, that's pretty, yeah, but it's for a vaccine, so it'll save more people than it kills. So okay, let's do it. So that's kind of, so there's some organ. We did organ harvesting. That was fun. My side quests for the day made me that was whatever. That's fucked. But the other side quest made me physically uncomfortable by quite a bit. So the other side quest was in the middle of the town. There is this house called the Willows, which is lived in by a woman named Anna Angel. There are these rumors going around town that she denies for the first half of the game, and you can't prove anything. But basically, in the town's past, there was this traveling caravan of performers that would go around to towns, and the first day they were to town, they're like like gypsies or something. They would do a performance for all the kids in the town, and then the next day they would do a performance for all the adults. And during the performance for all the adults, half of the performers would go and steal the children, and then they'd drive off with the kids. Like they were, child traffickers. And this Anna Angel character is rumored to be a refugee from when the authorities caught the child traffickers and killed them all. She escaped. That's what people say. Now, the pandemic hits, there's plague everywhere, and she says to you, I know this guy that I can blackmail on the other side of town for a lot of money, and I'm going to do that because I want to survive the pandemic. And I know that because we stole... Because he's got a child, and she's not his daughter. We stole her and gave him... Like, she's his, child slave, basically. And you know this now, and you're going to blackmail him with this, this advice. So, okay, so I go there, I do that, I locate the child, I talk to her, and I tell her everything, and she's like, okay, that's fucked. I'll confront my father. What I'll do is, 10 p.m., I'll go to this district, and then you can meet me there with my father. So it's the same district that your character told me that he was going to jump somebody and harvest their organs. So what's happened here is that so what I was planning to do was to save the child. What ended up happening was that we stole her beating heart out of her chest. After I told her that, yeah, sure, I'll meet you in this district. So we go from we're going to harvest organs to, hey, we stole this child. Go to this town, you'll be safe, I promise, winky face, and then you just bring a heart back to Ruben. The way the two separate quests, ended up meeting up at that one point in the most, fucked way, was really fucking funny, in, the darkest way possible. I thought that was great. I reckon if you don't do that other quest, somebody else must rock up at there, and there's just a generic NPC that you get the heart from.
No, because it needs to be a specific type of person. It needs to be a butcher or a worm bride, basically. So maybe you're right. Maybe it would be a generic NPC. But for me, when I did that quest, I basically they said you should kill a worm bride. And I got there, and there were 3 butchers there, and they're like, yeah, you have to murder her. And I was like, well, no, because I can kill you instead. So I felt justified in killing the butchers because they were going to murder the woman.
Right.
And that's probably the most evil thing I did for my playthrough, killing those butchers. But they were also demanding the death of an innocent woman, and they would have killed her if I didn't kill them. So does that make it justified? But yeah, it sounds like the Bachelor's playthrough is slightly darker.
Well, okay, so this is actually why I have a criticism of the game, because as much as I was impressed by these 2 quest chains that were separate, rolling in on each other, and giving this illusion of freedom, what my original plan was for this quest was to go to the creepy hunchback not father, take the money off him, then shoot him in the head. So I took the money off him.
No, not my hunchback. I need him. He's great.
Yeah, I took the money from the hunchback, and then I shot him in the head, and his character model didn't react at all, because NPCs are immune to being attacked in this game.
Yeah, there are some critical quest NPCs, yeah.
I never spoke to that character again other than that quest.
Right.
After taking that money.
But
So
you can't take his heart. It needed to be. I don't know if you knew that, but it needed to be from specific NPC types, I guess.
I didn't know that. I just
Okay.
because your character said you'd get me one, and I was like, sweet. um, but yeah, like when I couldn't shoot that NPC in the head, it kind of broke my immersion a bit, and was like, because up until that point, I think the game had done a really good job of making me think that anything was possible with the quest, chains. Like there was a bunch of ways some of the quests could branch, and there was kind of this like in the back of my head, it felt like anything could happen. Like the game was really reactive, and that moment just kind of like was like, no, this is a 2005 video game. It's not that reactive.
I didn't get that. I'm like I didn't feel it at all. Like I always
Okay.
felt like I was on a fairly strict narrative, so it wasn't as immersion breaking for me, I guess.
Yeah, because the game did a pretty good job of that originally. Um, and then it kind of like fell apart because I think a game that successfully does what it advertises, I guess, would be an incredible experience. But obviously not here. So yeah, that was the first 5 days of my playthrough. I know we've gotten off track a bit, but I thought,
No, that quest sounds amazing.
yeah,
I really
it
like
was
that.
really fun.
The middle of my playthrough was definitely a bit of a dip. So you first get a quest where you need to find, and I kid you not, you want to get access to the abattoir because that's where it seems like a lot of the intrigue is happening. The abattoir where they slaughter the cattle. But in order to be allowed in, you need to get 50, yes, 50 tablets of
What?
these alpha tablets. You know the
The yellow
tablets, the
ones.
shopkeepers. Yeah, the
Oh, that's
shopkeepers
easy.
might sell 11 at a time, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world when you have zero.
Yeah.
When you start out with zero. So what you need to do is you need to just walk around from shop to shop to shop. You got to remember which shop is which as well, all while dodging infection and plague or whatever. And I just thought 50 was just a ridiculous number that you had to get.
Yeah.
Then you had a day where you just ran around in circles chasing after the Inquisitor because you'd get to one place and they'd be like, "Oh, she just left. She went here." Oh my god, it was bad. But then the story in the last part of the game was really, really good, and it really came into its own because you started to interact with the foreman of the abattoir, and you started to get to the mysteries and truth of what was actually going on.
I thought the foreman died.
He does at the end of the game, but
and was
not
replaced by his daughter.
No, that so okay. So there's the Mother Superior, which is a daughter, and she's not the foreman of the abattoir. She's like, I don't know. She's like the spiritual leader of the abattoir or something. That could be wrong, but she seems to have a lot of control over it. The foreman is another person who's kind of like a spiritual person, like the Harrispex is. But he sees you as a threat.
Oh, sorry, the foreman is different to the overseer of the termitary. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So see, I don't know how much of this you know, James, but let's get to big picture spoilers. So you know how in your playthrough you had a very scientific explanation for why the groundwater got diseased and caused the issue.
Yeah, so let's talk about the main. So we're going to talk about the main spoiler of the plot of the game, which is like figuring out where the infection came from. Okay, so from what I gather online, each of the three characters comes to a different conclusion regarding the solution to the plague, which to me is really fucking cool narratively. And I think, like, I fully believe the way that the Bachelor came, because what happens is first you learn that all of the houses in the town have these tiny little holes in the floorboards that go down into the earth because the earth is sacred, so that the houses have this connection to the earth. Just all of them have these little holes into the earth. And then you find out that, I don't know, centuries ago, there was a cattle burial, ground deep beneath the earth. Like there's just, thousands of bull corpses or whatever, because, bulls are sacred, but also slaughtering bulls is sacred. But there's also this like layer of hard sediment between the all the nasty and the people. So one of the big questions is how does the plague get from deep under the earth up to the householes? And two of the characters that I spoke with a lot was Andre and Peter Stamerton. Peter is they're both architects. Peter is he's like a drunk drug addict kind of character who's always high off his face, and scribbling crazy designs all over the walls. And in part of the town, there's this like insane looking structure called the polyhedron, which looks like it should not be able to float up in the sky the way it does. But you find out after a lot of quests with Peter that you get your hands on the schematics for the polyhedron, which is the crazy mind-bending structure that's like bigger on the inside than it is outside and defies the laws of physics, whatever. That it's actually not that insane, that there's just a giant metal rod that goes, all the way, dozens of kilometers under the ground in order to support the weight on the end. And what's happening is that over time, the big weight on the end of the rod is acting like a lever and pushing the earth up, which is allowing the infection to get up and into the town. And that's the solution that my character comes up with. That it's this architecture that's been created is pushing up all this nastiness from under the earth. Is that where your character landed?
So my character also agreed that the problem was this polyhedron, but it was a far more, I guess, it was a far less scientific explanation for why it was doing the things it was doing. So in this town, they worship bulls, and the whole culture is based around bulls. And there's a belief that the hill that they're sitting on is like a god. It's a spiritual being. And I don't know if you ever saw this, James, but have you seen pictures of maps where the town resembles a bull?
Yeah, if you go into the map screen and you zoom out a lot, you eventually see the picture of the town as a bull.
As a bull, yeah. And as you go on further into the story, you see, I guess, a representation of the town where like a different perspective.
Yeah.
And for the Haruspecs, it begins to resemble a giant, spike in the head of a bull. The reason all of that stuff is in there is because they've been pouring blood into the ground for hundreds of years as part of the slaughtering of the bulls. And it's created, I guess, a reservoir of, hot boiling bull blood that can be accessed at any time. And you, as part of your spiritual quests, you, I guess, encounter impossible spiritual things. There's a part where, so basically, the foreman is trying to get rid of you. So he puts you on these spirit quests with the hope that you'll fail them. Like you know how there's a time limit, James?
Yeah.
In the first two quests, you get put on a secondary time limit. In the first one, your exhaustion meter goes up, and it keeps going up, and when it won't go down until you finish the quest. And then for the second one, it happens to your hunger meter. The third quest, though, is the funniest. The third quest is like, yeah, jump down this hole. And if you haven't gotten help from another character beforehand, you fall down the hole and you die. And that is the outcome of the game.
Nice.
Yeah, so he's trying to get rid of you. But if you speak to the shapeshifter first, you jump down the hole and she like miraculously saves you in a way that, is impossible, unless there's some kind of spirituality thing going on. And then you eventually get into a literal boss fight with the foreman, which is very tedious. Yeah. And you take your position as the spiritual leader of the town. But as I started going on these spirit quests and started to understand what was happening, it all for the Haruspecs, this bull god is real. And I think that in the context of the game, with everything I've seen, this bull god is real.
Yeah, my character doesn't believe in any of that.
Does he believe in the so the other half of it was the polyhedron, with the idea that the people seem to believe that there was a that Simon's spirit, the very first person, was residing in it. And one of the problems was that there wasn't room for both the god and the new Simon god, which existed in the polyhedron. They couldn't coexist, so it had to be one or the other.
Okay. Near the end of the game, the Canes start to get really weird. Because they believe in reincarnation, but not in the way, I guess, that you would think of it. They go into these like paragraphs and paragraphs of like weird circular logic that is like half deranged, half doesn't make sense, but they like fully believe it. And honestly, at this part of the game, I had a real hard time keeping up with the dialogue. Like, it was beyond me at some points. Like, the writing was just hard.
I don't think you're meant to understand it. I think that
Yeah.
this stuff probably becomes clearer in the Haruspex walkthrough, where you actually get to speak to where you're speaking to people who want to speak to you. Because I don't think any of the spiritual people, like, what was her name? Amity? Like, was she interested in speaking to you at all? She was not very high on The Bachelor. Aspity, yeah. She wasn't very high on The Bachelor when I spoke to her about you.
No, so Clara believes that Aspity's in love with your character. I don't know if that manifested in your playthrough.
She did everything you said, and she tells you everything, so maybe.
So in my playthrough, okay, so like on day like... So a big part of the lore is that one of the three founders has kind of forced the indigenous people of the steppe into a totally not servitude role inside this big structure at the top of town. The termitary, and the kin, which is what the indigenous people are called, they don't speak... Well, as far as I can tell, they don't speak the same dialect that the other characters speak. They speak in this weird voice. And at the start of the game, Aspity is protecting them because they're locked up in their area because, plot reasons. But they're being hunted, basically. And she is keeping one safe in her basement. And I get a quest on day, 2 from the son of that powerful person who's trying to keep them all hidden away in their shelter. That if it was to get around, if word was to get out to town that the kin had gotten loose, there'd be problems. So he's like, I'll give you 5,000 gold to go kill one. So I go to Aspity and I'm like, hey, are you keeping this guy in your house? I just want to talk to him. And then she says, yeah, sure, he's downstairs. So I go downstairs and I blow his brains out and then I leave without talking to him.
Wow, the Bachelor's a dickhead.
Yeah, so he's an asshole, dude. Half the conversation with the characters is the character talks to him about their deep-seated spiritual beliefs, and he says, "Are you fucking retarded? That sounds insane." He is so blunt and just so condescending to half the characters. It's so funny. Yeah, he's a bit of a dickhead. And she, obviously realizes this, and for the entire playthrough, her name, Aspity, is, a bastardization of the word asp, spit, and pity. And she embodies all of that towards the Bachelor in the game. She just is a complete prick. Just paragraphs and paragraphs of hateful, venom-speaked words. And she just there's one quest where I talk to her for 10 paragraphs or something, and then finally get her to tell me, where this person I'm looking for is, and it's on the other side of town. So I go to the other side of town, and it's not there.
Yeah,
she lied.
She's
lied.
tricked you. Yeah,
she's just fucking with me. It's are you fucking kidding me? And because the tedious walking back and forth across the town, I was a bit salty, but at the same time, it was really funny, narratively.
Yeah, but obviously, I get that the Bachelor doesn't believe it, but obviously there is something spiritual happening in this town, right? I'm just asking you.
Is there?
Well, let me. obviously in my playthrough, I experienced things that were otherwise impossible, right? I wasn't on any
Yep.
drugs or anything when that near-death experience happened and all that other stuff. But if you want an example of something, what did the virus look like to you? Because it looked like ghost faces and brown angels were rushing at me. Was it the same for you?
Yeah, so in the plague districts, it looked like that, and
Yeah.
I like that. I like the way the plague that the houses are literally bleeding. Like it looks
Yeah, see,
fucked.
there you go. That was the next thing I was going to say. The houses and grounds are bleeding.
But at the same time, like in game, like I looked into a microscope and saw the microbes and stuff, and was like, "This is just a virus."
Yeah, I'm not. So I think this is a case where, um, it's not that it's not a virus. It's that the cause of the virus is something deeper and beyond our understanding. That's how I understood it. Yes, we can.
My understanding is that the characters have completely different beliefs based on who they are.
Yeah, sure. To me, they build a complete picture together. It's not that the doctor was wrong in his what he was advising, and in his understanding of the plague and all that kind of stuff. It was that the root cause of what was going on was something deeper, something eldritch, something beyond our understanding.
Yeah, I didn't see much of that at all in my playthrough. Like it was very whenever there was something weird and arcane, there was a logical explanation that either my character came up with or one of the other reasonably logical characters came up with.
Mm.
Did you speak with the Inquisitor much? Because
Yes.
she was like my main NPC for a while.
So there was a couple of days where she was my main focus because she was the one who unlocked the doors to the abattoir because she has that power, and she she helped me get that. So to make the panacea, the cure, you need access to this blood that's made from aurochs, like the bull's blood, or it can be accessed, I think, by the overseer just by getting into the dirt, because you also find a patch of blood at the base of the polyhedron. So you combine that with one of your herbal mixtures and it makes a cure. So the Inquisitor was a key part of getting the first doses of panacea.
Mm. Yeah, like even the polyhedron itself is kind of like the Bachelor doesn't understand how it works, but his guess is like, okay, Peter is like half insane on drugs, but also he's also kind of a brilliant architect, so maybe he has, accidentally stumbled on some insane like law of physics or something that I
Yeah,
haven't
so
encountered yet.
there's a scientific explanation for it.
Yes,
Yeah.
even though he doesn't grasp the explanation, he believes there is one.
Sure, and that makes sense. Maybe after you play the Haruspex walkthrough, you'd be more on my side. I can understand coming from that perspective, it would feel more that way.
I just want to get across the idea that I haven't played a mystery game where, I've played multiple characters and they've all come to different conclusions that they each believe is 100% true.
And which sound reasonable, right?
Yeah, and that it's framed very reasonably that when you play as these characters, you can believe that they came to and you yourself can also come to these conclusions. And I think that's like, it's brilliant. I love it. I think it's incredible. I find that a lot of the time when you play a game that's very heavy on mystery and intrigue in the first like act or two, that the payoff is always super disappointing. I don't think I've ever played like a mystery game where I haven't been incredibly disappointed by the ending. I wasn't blown away by the Bachelor's solution to the mystery, but the combined like idea of there being characters all solving it differently, I think that's really cool. And this is one of the few games that I can say the ending of the mystery wasn't super disappointing to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And in fact, my interest in the story grew and grew and grew. And by the end, I was fully hooked and invested and did a bunch of reading. And I actually want to do a bunch more reading to better understand, because there's so many facets of the story that I don't quite get the hang of. I won't be playing this game again, but Pathologic 2 I might I might investigate a bit further. But I want to know more about the story, so I'll be reading, analysis videos and reading analysis articles and watching analysis videos, that kind of thing.
To be blunt, I think this game has like one of the best stories in a game that I've played, like full stop. The world's really interesting and intriguing. The characters are all strange and bizarre, have their own twisted motives. Sometimes are your friend and sometimes holding a dagger behind their back. It's all, I don't know, it's all very, it just sucks you in, right?
Yeah, it gets its hooks in you. The more you play, the more you want to know more, and I certainly want to know more. James, let's have another music break, and then maybe we can talk about
music
the.
break.
I think so, yeah, because I want
Yeah.
to talk about the endings a little bit and what our endings were.
Yeah, so what you're saying is there's going to be a second level of spoiler warning.
It's still under the same banner, but yeah, James, what would you like to pick as your second music piece?
Okay, I want to pick one of the night. Actually, I want to pick the theme of one of my favorite NPCs because
Okay.
it's not a loud and bombastic track. But I loved hearing it every time because I felt that like this NPC, there was just something about them that I found really entertaining. So, the NPC was Bad Grief, the leader of the black
Guild.
market, the Thieves Guild, basically, yeah. And when you go into his like den of dingy debauchery or whatever, it just plays this like this really low key drum and bass track that I thought was great. So here it is. Here's Bad Griff. Was Bad Grief's theme. I really thought it was great. It really, gets there in the end of the song. So Patrick wants to go to double spoiler territory
But
now.
before we do, I just wanted to talk about the regular endings, and the endings we got.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, because I wanted to say the first time I played this through, I got the bad ending. I didn't create enough panacea. I didn't realize I basically that there's this thing that happens where people can become critically ill. So one of my wards became critically ill. I didn't finish the main quest because you know that thing I was saying where you need to get the story out of someone.
Yeah.
So I went back to tell the person the end of the story, and then it said, "Oh, and how? What happened next?" And then it gave you three options to continue telling the story. So you had to remember it, and I did not remember it. So I guessed at one of these options. She's like, "Nah, that's not how the story goes. Quest failed." It just that was it. I was like, okay, and I didn't reload. I was just like, all right, here we go. And one of my wards
Imagine not saving before every conversation, though.
well, I mean, I thought, this is just how the game goes. Like I'm just gonna deal with the consequences, right?
When I got one hit killed by a mugger, I was like, no, I'm not playing every day from the
I
start.
I quick saved a lot. I was just like, well, I guess my ward's gonna fall ill. Like I failed the main quest. I quick saved a lot. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say I wasn't quick saving, because if you don't quick save, you die. I just meant I tried to live with my story consequences and story mistakes I made. And then I for my quest on a later day to get the panacea, I had to interact with Notkin, but there was a person outside the house saying he's ill, and I didn't have the vaccine, and I thought I needed the vaccine to cure him. Whereas actually, you can give antibiotics to the guy, and he'll let you in.
Did you have access to Schmouder as well as the panacea?
There were a couple of points, but
did you ever get that explained to you?
Yeah. It was the kids one.
Yeah. So basically, that there was a plague before, and the children of the town, being children who think they're better than adults, were like, the adults can't cure the plague, but we know better. So what we'll do is we'll break into the pharmacy, steal all the medicine, and then mix it together to make super medicine, and then we'll take it. Which, in the story quest that I had for this topic, apparently heaps of the children just died, because of course they did after mixing together, like, literally every antibiotic. But, magically, they did make a cure for the disease, but when you take it in-game, it just puts you to, like, 2 HP or something.
Which is no big deal.
Yeah, it was. I laughed a lot when I was reading the dialogue about like these kids just mixing drugs together. It was great.
Yeah, so I thought I couldn't cure this. I thought I was like just stuffed. It's like, well, I can't continue this quest. And then I ran out of time to do the other quest. I was like, whatever. And then the game ended because I had 2 people that I hadn't cured and I had no panacea. So my first playthrough of this game ended in failure. And it was only when I reloaded my day 10 save and realized that day you can get 6 panaceas. And I had my I finally got choke pointed on exactly day 10 after playing fine and perfectly. And it just screwed everything up because that was the one day where you could get all of the vaccines. But I ended up loading that save and playing again through from day 10 and got the successful ending. So I just wanted to say, I got the bad ending, and I kind of think it's quite cool that you can just play awfully and just get the bad ending. It's neat that you don't get a game over screen when people start dying. You can just keep playing and fail, and that's part of the experience. So I thought that was I really liked that inclusion as a game design thing. A tragic ending with everyone dying is right up my books.
Yeah, I found that if people got sick that weren't my bound, they would get sick, but they wouldn't die.
Yeah.
Like, so at the end of the game, a bunch of the bound was sick, and I was giving them, like, shitty medicine so I could talk to them, but I wasn't giving them the good stuff.
Yeah, I didn't realize you could do that. That was my fault.
I got a funny story, actually. You know how I said I went into this game blind?
Yep.
On day, it might even be day one, where that quest for, the kids making the schmauders, the cures. So Lara tells me about that, and I go and I confiscate them because the kids are taking them and dying.
Yep.
Because of course they are. And I walk back to Lara, and she says, "This is before I've solved the murder." And at this point, like, I don't know that this, even though the game's called Pathologic, I don't know that there's a disease.
Yep.
So I have this schmauder that says, like, if you get an infection, it might cure it. And I was like, she's like, "I'll give you 1,000 gold for the schmauder." And I had, like, 400 gold. And I was like, holy shit, that's so much, and took it.
Nice.
And then...
Yeah, because normally poison or whatever is like this irrelevant status effect in games, right?
So I was really, really regretting that at the end of the game, because it was like, I'm not going back to day one. It's really funny. This is spoilers too, but something I thought was so funny was like, it's a survival game. Day one, bread costs 300 gold. And, that's expensive, but you can manage it. Day one, you solve the mystery, reveal to the town that there's a pandemic. Day two, bread costs 1,600 gold. It's like, what?
The other thing I did at the beginning of the game was I explored. I was like, ooh, let's go look at everything. So I just walked around the town looking at things.
Wasting time.
For my first 2 days. I was like, I wonder what's over here. How do I get in here? What's this polyhedron thing? Just walking around. I might loot a bin occasionally, but I was just exploring because I'm like, oh, I'm just. and then when shit got real, I was like, I am very unprepared for this. So I started again from the start and was looting bins like a maniac for every second I could. But yeah, it is funny when you don't understand the severity of how bad things are going to get. You have a more relaxed approach at first. All right, James, let's return to the ending. So tell us about your ending. What did you do at the end of the game?
Okay, so on the last day, you get 2 quests from the other 2 playable characters to cure their sick in addition to yours. Because I was an idiot and sold the schmauder for a pittance, because you have 60,000 gold at the end, and they're worth 10 each instead of 1. Anyway, I didn't have enough, so I could only cure one of the characters' sick people. Clara's Bound are all the fucking scumbags of the earth characters. I like Bad Grief. He's my bro, even though I paid him 10,000 gold to kill innocent guards to get you out of jail, whatever. And he's probably the reason why all the muggers are armed. But still, he's my bro. But, Anna Angel, the child trafficker, and lots of the evil little kids. I was like, no, I'm not saving these people. They can die. It's fine. I was very happy when Anna Angel died. But I saved all your characters, which meant that in the final discussion about what to do, because what happens is the army comes with a giant cannon, literally a giant cannon, and they're like... Okay.
Yeah, they don't quite grasp that artillery has quite a long range, unfortunately.
Well, actually they do, because the cannon that comes to town is it's not a real cannon, it's just a scare tactic cannon.
Really?
Yeah, so they explain that there's actually artillery way further back that's the real artillery.
Wow, okay, sure. All right, fair enough. Fair point.
Yeah. Anyway, so basically, when the army rocked up, I was expecting the general to be extremely unreasonable. But he was quite reasonable, surprisingly. And he said, if you can come to a conclusion about what's causing the plague and you let me know, I'll trust you because you're a doctor, and I'll use the artillery to raise the cause of the plague. If you can't come up with a good solution, I'm going to bomb the entire town because the plague's fucked and we don't want it to infect, Russia as a whole or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So in my playthrough, I discover that because the polyhedron is leaning, it's allowing the plague to get out. So logically, me, the player, is like, if we just destroy the polyhedron, then the town can be saved. Now, the batch, like, there's an ending for each of the characters that's, their ending, quote unquote, but you can choose the other endings. So destroying the polyhedron was your ending, which is what I chose because I thought that made the most sense. But apparently, the Bachelor's ending is the one where he destroys the town to save the polyhedron. And that makes sense to me as well, because his character, he doesn't really, like, he wants to get the vaccine and save the people, but his reasoning is what he can do is he can get all the people and put them inside the polyhedron, then raise the town, then relocate the people somewhere else, because he places zero value on the town, on its culture, on its, heritage, all of
and
that
the people
stuff.
who are already infected. He's like, they're a lost cause.
They're a lost cause because, well, they kind of are to some extent.
Well, no, but they're not, and I guess that's the distinction in their philosophies. The doctor's making a vaccine, the Haruspex is making a panacea.
Yeah,
because the Haruspex wants to save the town and the people in it. The doctor wants to prevent it getting any worse.
Yeah. He wants to prevent it getting any worse, and he wants to preserve the scientific, artistic marvel that is the polyhedron, which I think near the end of the game, he probably values that more than the townsfolk.
Can I clarify? So the doctor's, like, the thing that's brought him to the town is this wish to conquer death. So are you saying that the doctor doesn't see any value in what people are saying about, Simon being reincarnated as the soul of the polyhedron? I even get a thing on my map that shows kind of like a fetus inside the polyhedron. I don't know if that was appearing on your map.
Yeah, the fetus doesn't appear. I see all these angles and like measurements and stuff because it's
because I thought his wish to conquer death might have fed into that, but maybe it just doesn't come into it.
Yeah. So, like, after I get letters from the Power B, and they're like, if you can save the town, we won't destroy your laboratory, basically. So,
okay.
I was struggling with this the whole playthrough, wondering exactly how much he cared about the people he was trying to save and how much it was just for personal gain. And, like, in a bunch of the quests, there's definitely a human side to him. He's not like a cold monster who only cares about his research all the time, right? But he's definitely colder than your character. Like, there's degrees of coldness. He's not a monster, but, he's not super charitable, I don't think.
The Haruspex seems like a pretty good guy, honestly. Like, it's difficult to pick out things he did that were wrong. I mean, you can certainly play him as a child murderer. You can, but you can also not. And it seems like the Bachelor's more of a nuanced character. He's got more going on. I'm kind of disappointed I didn't get to play him because I think I'd have enjoyed it more.
Yeah, I think you would have enjoyed it. Yeah.
But I like that we have different perspectives. That's cool as well. Should we talk about the secret endings?
Yeah, so this is the double spoilers because there's secret endings that kind of throw the whole game on their head. And I know we've already gone into spoilers, but like really, if you want to play this game, you should probably play it before listening to the secret ending discussion because it's pretty large. So anyway, did you actually get the so what I did was I wasn't able to save everyone because you need to save so I got the first part of the secret ending because there's two. And you get the secret endings by saving the other people's bounds. So if you save one set, you get the first. And if you save the second set, you get the second secret ending. So I reloaded my save and hacked myself in a bunch of schmouters so that I could experience it for the sake of review. But the second secret ending, you go and you meet with the powers that be, who are the people. I don't know if you interacted with them at all in your playthrough, but in the Bachelor's playthrough, you get these letters every day from quote-unquote the powers that be, that seem to be, the people in charge of society.
The government,
in
right?
general. Like the government, the people threatening to destroy a lab. And anyway, they're like, actually, we're here in town. We're in the polyhedron. So come to the polyhedron, go to the bottom floor, close your eyes for 5 seconds, and then open them, and we'll be there. So you do that, and you wake up in this like little garden with 2 children. So turns out that we haven't spoken about this yet, but something that happens every day at midnight is that there's a theatre in the town, and if you go to the theatre at midnight, you get to see a mime performance that is somewhat prophetic in that it will sort of predict what's going to happen in the following days a little bit in some ways, but, it's unclear. But there's lots of, like,
meta-narrative elements
meta-narrative
elements
to the story. Yeah, like there's these characters that teach you the basics of how to play, but they're dressed up in theatre costumes, and they're who's in the mime performance. And there's people that seem to know more than they should. The third unlockable character just
breaks the fourth wall constantly.
Yeah. She knows what's going to happen.
How did you feel about this, James? Because my response upon hearing about this is that I don't really care. Like, I think people get too attached and too involved with this final scene at the end of the game. It doesn't undermine any of the experience you've had in your past 20 hours. It doesn't take away from the story at all. I personally think it would have been better if it wasn't there, but I don't think it existing detracts from the rest of the experience. It's almost like a little Easter egg at the end of the game, and that's the end of my feelings on it. It doesn't bother me. I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other.
I kind of agree. Like, I honestly would prefer if it wasn't there, because, like, the whole thing is that there are these 2 kids playing with their dolls in the sand, and that's what the whole story is just kids playing with their toys. I guess I don't think it needed to be there. I think that they could have made something more interesting. Like, I think all the stuff with the play and like that having I wish that there was the meta-narrative stuff, but it was unexplained, I guess.
It reminded me of there's a Stephen King book called Under the Dome, where all of a sudden in a town a dome just appears over a town. You can't get in or out. It's completely invisible, and the town kind of slowly falls to pieces, not because of anything that's actively being done to them, but just because of the effects that this is having on the town. And it turns out it was, some eldritch or alien presence that set everything in effect. So it kind of reminded me of that. There's like this bit of eldritch horror. I know it's kids in a sandpit, but it's kind of similar. But ultimately, like, it doesn't bother me, but it doesn't need to be there. I don't think it adds anything to the story, really.
Yeah. I hear they play it up a bit more in 2, which I'm kind of interested in playing at some point if the writing's anywhere near.
Absolutely. I think that if it's well done and better seeded throughout the entire story, it could be quite intriguing. But it felt very tacked on at the end here.
Yeah, I kind of agree. We're pushing like 2 hours, 15 minutes, Patrick. I think it is time to go to final impressions.
Shall I begin?
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay. So, I've heard a lot of things about Pathologic. The way people describe this game, they're like, it's a bad game, but 10 out of 10 recommend, or it's the best bad game I've ever played. I'm going to be very to the point here. Pathologic is a bad game and you should not play it. Over the past couple of hours, we have been waxing lyrically about just how brilliant the story is in Pathologic. The intertwined narrative, the characterization, the dialogue, the grim atmosphere that gets set. But in some ways, the fact that the majority of our discussion has been about the story is a type of misrepresentation of what the actual experience of playing Pathologic was like. And the reason I was so forceful when I talked about how bad the gameplay was is that is what you are going to be doing for 90% of your time playing Pathologic. And because of that, because the vast majority of your experience is tedious and boring, I cannot recommend this game, and I think that Pathologic is a bad video game. If the survival mechanics were better implemented, if combat had more threat to it, if walking was faster or there was a sprint function, if the town was smaller so it didn't take forever to get from place A to place B, then maybe the gameplay could tip over the edge to the point where the story would justify you playing it. But most of your time playing this game is not going to be one feeling pressured or tense or engaged. It's one where you're going to be bored out of your brain. And a game that leaves you bored out of your brain is not one that I can ever recommend, regardless of how good the last 10 or 20% of the story is. So yeah, Pathologic, unfortunately, is a failure to me, and that breaks my heart. But the fact of the matter is, that is the truth of the Pathologic experience, tedium. And any game that has tedium as its front and center experience is not a very good game.
Pathologic has probably become one of my favorite games, I think. Everything Patrick said just before is absolutely correct. It is a miserable experience filled with obtuse, superstitious, and morally bankrupt characters, and its gameplay consists of little more than walking from point A to B for about 30 plus hours, literally watching paint dry. And despite this, it was a game that was constantly on my mind for the last 4 weeks or something. Like, when I wasn't playing Pathologic, I was thinking about Pathologic. It was all that I could think about for the past 2 weeks. The characters, the story, all of the history that I dug up through, even on the wikis and from the characters I was talking to. I have been utterly enraptured by this game's story and plot. Yes, I completely agree that the gameplay is terrible in a lot of ways, but I genuinely believe that this is one of the best stories that video games has to offer, and I would implore people listening to give it a try. Honestly, like if there's a mod that increases the speed of walking, absolutely. I don't think you can get. This is a game because this is a game that is told from so many different angles. I feel like you can't get the same experience just by, watching somebody play it or browsing wikis for hours. I feel like you have to interact with the narrative to get to that good stuff. So I think if you can play this game modded to reduce the amount of gameplay that you have to do, then that would be the best way to experience this game and story. And I think it is absolutely worth it. But yeah, there are going to be some people who fucking hate this game, and I really, I can't disagree with them. Like, I fully understand why they would hate it, but to me, the story is just so good that it was absolutely worth it from beginning to end.
There's probably some no-clip command or God mode or something that you can turn on and just fly around and talk from person to person. And the game is probably more enjoyable experience that way. Like, it's hard, right? Because the survival mechanics are important to reinforcing the atmosphere of dread and horror, right? Like, it's not that there shouldn't be survival mechanics in a game like this. I just think the execution is so poor that it's better off without them. And that's really unfortunate because it's a really good example of how mechanics it should be a good example of how mechanics and storytelling can work in tandem, but it just doesn't work how it should.
Yeah, it's like it's perfect on paper, and then the actual implementation is very questionable. So I'm extremely interested in playing Pathologic 2 because it's both a sequel and a remake of the first game. Like, it's the same narrative, just redone. So honestly, like, that's probably a better place to start. But it's hard for me just to say, guys, play Pathologic 2. It's probably better when I haven't played that game, and I have played this game, and I did get sucked in really hard. So, at the end of the day, I can recommend this game, but it's probably going to be like 1 in 100,000 people is going to enjoy it the same, to the same degree that I did, in all honesty.
Yeah, I just can't get behind this idea of a game. This is my same problem with JRPGs. Like, I can't get behind this idea of so much of the actual gaming experience being awful, but you still recommending it on the basis of the 20% of experience being really good. Like, I get that part is really good. I agree with that. But the truth is, most of the time, it's a bad experience. So let's be honest about what you're going to spend the majority of your time doing. Like, if you read a good book, probably 80 to 90% of that really good book is enjoyable. This is like a book or a movie where only 20% of it is really good.
Yeah, but like when I think back on Pathologic, I can only remember the good stuff, right? Like you can obviously remember that you walked around for 40 hours, but it all, it all sits in this little box in my mind. I don't, every time I think about walking around in Pathologic, the whole 40 hours unravels in my mind. No, it's not like that. It's I remember all the good stuff, so I have the rest of my life to think about this incredible story. So that 30 hours investment, I'm happy to give that up.
Okay, yeah. See, I, and you're right. And I think this is a problem that a lot of people have when they talk about these things that they like. They remember the things they like and they dismiss the things they don't like out of hand. I'm not saying you're wrong and that the experience wasn't worthwhile for you. I get that. It's just hard for me to get behind that. I just can't. That's just not how I feel, and that's why I despise grinding in these games and games wasting my time, because I don't think the experience is worth that time investment. There are movies and books and other video games that are enjoyable for their entire duration. So I'd rather engage with that media, or I'd rather engage with that than something that's only good for such a small percentage of its playtime.
Patrick, if you can recommend me a game with a story this good, with good gameplay, I am all ears. Honestly, it's just one of the better ones that I've encountered.
Yeah, I agree. I just it doesn't matter how good it is, man. It's just not worth the pain. And I guess that's just the difference between us two.
Yeah.
Alrighty, I'd say that's about it. Thank you everyone so much for listening to us talk about Pathologic. Hopefully you were able to follow what we were saying if you've never played the game before. It was certainly an experience, and I think a good game to play for the podcast, regardless of how we ultimately feel about it. James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got links to all of our episodes, all of our articles. We're available on anywhere you listen to the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, wherever. Most importantly of all, we would love if you would drop by and tell us what you think on our Discord server. Our Discord server is where we get most of our community interaction, whether it's talking about old games, new games. We take game recommendations. And we'd love to hear what you think. What was your experience like playing Pathologic? Was it different to ours? And is Pathologic 2 actually worth playing? Would I find it, or would James find it a better experience than the first? We would love to hear. So yeah, thank you once again for listening. It's been a blast. All right, James. So I picked Pathologic. Interestingly enough, I don't regret picking Pathologic, because even if the game was awful, it was definitely an interesting topic to discuss. So I'm glad I picked it. What are we doing next fortnight?
Okay, well, that was a big marathon of a game that I got like a third of the way through. So I think we can go for something a little shorter, a little more bite-sized. So I'm going to pick Star Fox 64, also known in some regions as Lilac Wars. We haven't really played an on-rails shooter before, Patrick. I never owned this game as a kid, but I always played it at my friends' houses, and I think I played it on an emulator a couple of times. And I always remember really enjoying the first hour of playing it. So looking forward to giving it a go. Bit different to this game.
So yeah, I'm looking forward. This is a game I've always been intrigued. I've never played Star Fox 64. I've seen all the memes in regards to it, but that's about it. What very old fashioned meme? Do a barrel roll. That's like a vintage meme before people knew what they were doing. But outside of that, never played it, but intrigued to try. Haven't done a rail shooter since Pokemon Snap, so should be fun.
Yeah, it's a sequel episode.
We should also mention that James and I are also beginning a playthrough of Fallout 2. We had Chris from the Retro Asylum podcast on our show a few months back, and we played through Fallout 1, and we're going to go do the sequel on the Retro Asylum podcast, which should be a lot of fun. But we've picked some short episodes so that we have time to properly play and finish Fallout 2. So we highly recommend you check them out. Their stuff is great. It's very entertaining. They tend to do games a little bit older than ours, probably like it's more like 90s and even late 80s video games, which is quite interesting. Tends to be a bit earlier than our time. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to going on their show and playing some Fallout 2.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that it's going to be better than Fallout 1. I really didn't like that game, and committing another lot of hours to... Honestly, I found Pathologic more fun to play than Fallout 1, so, that's saying something. I am going to make a Dex character this time around, because the first time I made a strength character and I had like 4 agility, because I hadn't realized that the action economy was based around the agility stat. So I had like 3 action points, could like move, not attack in the same turn. That was good. So I'm gonna make a 10 Dex character this time around. I'm gonna break that action economy wide open. Hopefully I have a much better time.
I have a suspicion we're all going to do that after hearing the experiences. Quite funny. So, but yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I'm eager to see if it improves on the first, or if we start to see the first corruption of the grim world. It'll be interesting to see which direction it goes in. So
the beginning is very painful.
Yeah, so we'll see you next fortnight for Star Fox 64, and please do check out the Retro Asylum podcast in about a month, where we'll be playing Fallout 2. Thanks for listening, everyone.